for a familiar face in an all-new place. Hello everyone and welcome to Let's Play Sparkster for the Genesis. We played the Super Nintendo version of the game, I think close to a year and a half to 2 years ago at this point. The Genesis version, while it has the exact same soundtrack, is a completely different game. We're talking like Aladdin on Super Nintendo versus Genesis here. Alright, we're in the Prologue stage right now, and I do mean Prologue. If you press the start button at any point during that cutscene or this fight against Axel Gear and his mech, you skip it and go right into level 1. If you want to just go through the game fast, you can do that no problem, but if you want to get the true ending, you need to beat this fight, which is essentially Rock'em Sock'em Robots. Moving your mech left to right is pretty self-explanatory, but your 3 face buttons do 3 separate things. You have 2 different punches, a faster one that does less damage, and a longer one or a slower punch that does more damage. However, whenever you attempt to punch him, usually Axel Gear will go into a block. You need to kind of catch him off guard. You can block his punches, though, with I believe it's the C button, as well as block his missiles. And you're just going to want to approach him slowly and block when you can, and then try to find an opening. It's not necessarily hard, but it can be a long and tedious fight, especially for what is technically level 1, as you're not meant to fight this, sort of. We fight this thing again later on in the game, when you're actively using the mech more prominently. So them placing this Prologue stage is weird. The main reason we need to fight this, though, is for the true ending, because if you skip it, you don't get that sword that you saw Sparkster next to a moment ago. That just never ends up in your quote-unquote inventory, so we can't get the true ending because of that, and that alone. Bit of a weird intro, but given how Sparkster, even on the Super Nintendo, had a lot of various different gameplay styles in it, at least it's upfront with the fact that it's not going to just be the Rocket Knight platforming. Even though I'd rather it would just be the Rocket Knight platforming, more on that as we progress through. So despite the fact I handled the Super Nintendo version of Sparkster first, Sparkster on the Genesis is the proper sequel to Rocket Knight Adventures, hence why it has the Rocket Knight Adventures 2 subtitle. And the gameplay is by and large the same as it was in Spectre Super Nintendo. We got the automatically charging jetpack that you can press a button to jet in a certain direction if you're holding an any direction on the D-pad. You can do a spin attack by holding down that can do upwards of 2 hits per enemy. You're going to be rocketing all over the place, taking slashes at enemies in order to take out their health, while also grabbing items along the way. Most notably amongst the items is the gems. When you get 10 of the gems, they are automatically entered into a roulette you can see on the top right that gives you a random item. It can give you various health items, it can give you more gems, it can give you extra lives, which makes this arguably one of the easiest Rocket Knight games for that alone. But it can also throw bombs at you, which can do damage to you. That's notably the most common thing I find that it gets for you. With that said, you're still going to want to get as many as you can because, hey, if you get a health refill at a tight moment or an extra life when you might need them, it's always good. There aren't any super big control differences otherwise, though. Sparkster himself still flies around all over the place the exact same way as he did before. The big thing is you're still going to want to keep in mind that when you're rocket dashing, you are invulnerable to an extent. You can phase through a lot of projectiles and enemies. It's only really when the animation's about to end that your hitbox becomes damageable again. You're going to want to use that to your advantage when you're fighting mini bosses like these rolling cars that have a bunch of just rotating maces that are very easy hitboxes to get hit by. You do get a slightly different charge when your jetpack is fully charged versus only partially. It's mostly has to do with the distance and not your momentum, but whether or not you can use it to interact with certain items. Plus, you can do a bit more of a spam if I believe you get enough, if it's charged up higher. So you can do 2 in faster succession. Whenever you grab a jetpack item, you are thrown in the direction you're holding on the D-pad. Usually it's going to be straightforward. In fact, sometimes they place them in places that really feels like they meant to give you some sort of forewarning they were coming, but no such luck. With that said, this game's a little vague on the plot details, especially because it's a completely different plot from the Super Nintendo version, so let's take a look at what the manual has to say. This is a story of the strange world of Elhorn, a world of valiant knights and magic, and machines. Near the center of Elhorn lies the peaceful and enchanted kingdom of Zebulos. Long ago, the army of the Devotintos Empire invaded Zebulos with an evil and powerful spaceship called the Pig Star. But thanks to the courage of Sparkster, the leader of the elite fighting force known as the Rocket Knights, the vicious Imperial army was destroyed. For a time, it looked as though Zebulos would once again find peace. But alas, it was not meant to be. All the lands in Elhorn were again engulfed in war. In every region of Elhorn, tribes formerly held in the evil grip of the Devotintos Empire turned violent. In this mass confusion, there arose the Empire of Gedol. The Gedol Empire soon swelled, using every evil means available to take control of every region of Elhorn. The King of Gedol then learned of the existence of Sparkster. Fearful of the interference of the legendary Rocket Knight, King Gedol sent an order for his troops to have the Sparkster destroyed. Sparkster stands alone, the sole hope of Elhorn against the giant Gedol Empire. Let the adventures begin. Notably, no commentary on the woman who just got kidnapped. Is there a character section that has that in it? Now, notably, this section of the level is where we have to do something very important. We want to rocket right across through that invisible wall you can't tell you can walk through. Why? Down here is a sword. We got one of these for clearing the prologue mecha fight against Axelgear, a returning character from the first game. In order to get the true ending, you need to get all 7 of those that are located throughout the game, including the one that you get from a forced boss fight later on and the prologue stage. The other 5 are sort of hidden through stages. There's one you get for beating a different boss fight even, so you get 2 of them from boss fights, 3 counting the prologue stage. But they are our main goal in order to get the true ending. They're by and large easy to find as long as you keep an open eye out. There's only really one outside the prologue stage one that you can accidentally press the start button and completely screw yourself out of the true ending by missing. That is hard to get, and it's not because the thing itself is hard, it's because what's near it is instant death. We do have a couple of power-ups in this game even outside of the ones I've mentioned so far, though, and the most notable one is the fire. What that does is that turns your sword into a fire sword, where it does either double or some amount more damage, which is super useful against boss fights. With that said, if you get hit, you lose it, so it's your mastery is what makes the use of it sort of deal. And here we have a mini-boss against a rotating cylinder. Blocks that look like they're right out of Heatman stage from Mega Man 2 will appear at certain altitudes where you need to rocket out to the side and then dash into these screws to slowly make this tower stop functioning. I think they generally make it so that they rise, which ones you can attack rise up in a row, but also not so much. If there's a cannon there, it'll just fire out a few times, and from there you just need to hope that the right one becomes hittable. It's a war of attrition more than anything else. Which is, by and large, how I can describe Sparkster on the Genesis anyway. This is definitely the easier game between it and the Super Nintendo version. Not only because of the amount of continues you can get, but the lottery system goes, the slot system, rather, for items goes a long way in terms of assisting your survivability, especially because the only place there's usually not gems for you to get is boss fights. But that also means there's an entire stage worth where you can get extra health or extra lives. Sure, it's all up to the luck of the draw, but your luck is going to be higher than you think because there's only so many options and there are a lot of gems in the game stages. With that said, we are somehow still not done with Stage 1. Now we're at a complete different aesthetic change. The big thing that's going to be going on here is that there's a lot of bouncing vines that will try to charge into you, but you can just charge through a lot of them by using the rocket dash. Here's also where we get introduced to another new mechanic. I think new. I forget if this is in the first game, honestly, and I forget if it was even in the Super Nintendo version because it's been a while. You can climb and cling to certain bars and walk around them, but you can also jump on top of them to use them as platforms. The big thing is which side you're going to want to be on depends not only on the level, but what's around you. And now time for a mini-boss. That is a really creepy plant face. This thing has a couple of different attacks it can do. It can bang the wall behind it in order to make bombs and other items fall from the ceiling. That's really hard to dodge. It can throw bombs directly at you like that. And if you stay close-ish to it, it can do a bit of an armed swing to try and, like, punch you. You're going to want to do a lot of diagonals or straight dashes, into its face in order to actively damage it. What you really want to use advantage of is the rebound you get whenever you do a rocket dash, because be it into a wall or an enemy, you're going to rebound off of them, and that's really useful for getting out of attack's way. Out of harm's way, rather. With that said, sometimes the hitboxes disagree with you, and while you won't get hit, you won't damage the boss. That happens a number of times throughout the game. It's not really isolated to just this one boss fight. Also, this game's soundtrack is fantastic. Again, it's the same soundtrack as the Super Nintendo version, but it's on the Genesis sound chip. And maybe it's just because of how the first game's soundtrack was, but I feel like this sound font fits the soundtrack better, usually. Also, I just remembered, another thing that makes this game feel easier than Sparkster on the Genesis, or Super Nintendo. If I recall the way that game worked, you needed to play the games on higher difficulties to get the true ending. No such thing here. You can get the true ending as long as you're playing the game. I think you might need to be on normal to access one particular stage, but you don't have to be on hard mode whatsoever. I don't think the ending extends on higher difficulties beyond that. From memory, if I'm wrong, please tell me, so I can make an addendum video later on. With that said, Stage 1 is by and large the longest stage in the game if you count the prologue as part of it, as it's the only level that has an outright aesthetic change halfway through. And it makes me wonder if this is meant to be an entirely separate stage at first. They just haven't have a good boss fight to end it off with. And now we're being stalked by this dude in an orb. That's going to be our next mini-boss. If you don't keep up the pace, they will catch up with you and just do touch damage. But there's also 10 gems in here. That's what the red gems are. They count for 10, so it's a free lottery roll, more or less. They place a lot of rockets in the pathway leading up to this that you're like meant to angle yourself and just bounce all around the pathway to avoid getting hit, or at least phase through his hitbox with. But I don't really find it works too well. That said, the way this mini-boss works, you're both bouncing on trampolines, and every couple of jumps, when he's not throwing bombs at you between jumps, he'll bounce all over the place or run around along the walls using his trampoline as a way to extend his reach. You can usually get 3 to 4 different charges into him between his attacks, and sometimes he'll even shoot apples out of himself for some reason, so you can even get healed by the boss himself. Well, mini-boss at least. Not too bad, but it can be a little cramped because of how small the room is compared to how fast the boss itself moves. How do you guys like auto-scrollers? Because this game's got like 2.5 of them. You're going to want to be careful in this train segment, though, because the boxes you destroy, these are in a lot of the levels, they all contain random items. At least I think they're random. But a lot of them will also just contain enemies, so whenever you're attacking one of these boxes, don't be a fool, double tap. Always make sure that whatever's about to be in them is dead in case it's an enemy. You can also hold your sword there in the case you're like in the middle of the same animation, and that'll sometimes kill them off. It's a little inconsistent, I find. It depends on how far or what part of the sword is on the box. The game's hitboxes and collision detection and everything usually works pretty well, but there's the occasional moment of what just happened, like how did I not hit those 2 enemies there, for instance? It's a little iffy. By and large, though, I think the enemy spawns are very consistent. You can tell when more enemies are going to be dropping in from above based off what's going on in the background, so you don't have to worry about too much there. With that said, we are coming up on the boss fight of Stage 1. It's a giant robot, but it's not your average giant robot. It's a giant robot whose legs don't work, and because of that, the fight is only fought horizontally. We're going to be aiming for the face, namely the nose. We actually just destroyed the feet right there, which is why the robot can't stand up, while avoiding various attacks coming from, I believe, the mouth and the arm, from memory? The arm's going to be flailing all over the place, trying to do contact damage and occasionally firing out the odd projectile, if memory serves. The best strategy you're going to want to do here is diagonal charges into the nose. The eye will also fire projectiles at you, as can the fist itself. Alright, so I did have that right. You want to use the thing I mentioned earlier where the charges and rocket dashes you do have some invincibility to projectiles and other hazards to kind of charge downward into the nose and then through the fist, since the fist is the hardest part to dodge about this fight, as you can see right there. Thankfully, the game's got a pretty good health system in that, even though it says I have 5 hearts, I technically have, I believe it's 10 health. And very few things in this game do enough health at this point to make it so that you'll die instantly. Enough charges to the nose, and it dies pretty quickly. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 2, we're going to be starting off with Stage 2. See you guys then.